Welcome inside the parlor. I'm sporting my new Players Travel Polo, which I just acquired. I love this color. XL fits like a T. I've put a link in the description below if you fancy your own. But I'm going to review the final two games of our preseason, not getting into the minutiae, but the wider issues that came from these last two games, which, by the way, did not dampen the enthusiasm or the optimism that was already building in America. So let's crack on. Lazio and Valencia, what did we learn? Streaming situation. Funny that the biggest buzz from Spain on social media was not the fact that Villa won to close out the preseason. It was the quality of, or at least the lack of quality of the stream on Villa TV. In fact, I imagined as I was watching, this is probably what it would have felt like if you were out in the sun in Valencia having way too many cervezas, and then you're at the stadium and you're watching and seeing double vision. And I knew at halftime when it didn't improve, it was probably a problem at the source, and somehow the communication was not correct because there was a serious bitrate problem. And I don't really think the people in Valencia cared too much whether the stream was 4K at Aston Villa, quite frankly. Once it started that way and it didn't change, Villa was kind of hooped, as were their subscribers. So here's the perfect opportunity for Aston Villa's new president of business operations, Christopher Heck, to turn a negative into a positive. Acknowledge that the stream was not up to Aston Villa's very high standards, and just offer everybody who bought the individual pass to that game or the group of games a £5 voucher to Aston Villa's online club shop. Club relations are so critical, and so many clubs get this stuff wrong. Here's a great opportunity to make it right. Clubs carefully curated. It is really important to choose the right opponents for your preseason, and I think Aston Villa did that. I mean, Lazio. These are the Serie A runners-up. They're playing Champions League football this year, and I know they're a little bit behind us in their preseason preparations, but it's not like they're a bunch of stiffs. There's a very fine line between wanting to build confidence and get victories with having realistic tests that push your team to the limits at times. And this year, of course, we have the added responsibility of trying to create environments involving European teams, the likes of which we might be facing in the Europa Conference League. Valencia is much closer to their season than Lazio were. They're like us. They're about to kick off, and they're coming off not the best season in their books. So this was perfect. An away date in Spain, warm climate, imposing and impressive, if not older stadium. But this is what one of our European nights could feel like. Different type of game, different experience, different climate, definitely different refereeing standards. And all of that is really, really important in a long campaign. So just like everything else Aston Villa is doing, with one exception, of course, the stream to the game, all of the preparations seem so well thought out, the opponents well curated, and all of it just so strategic. Reckless routines. Do you know, apart from the Watkins penalty goal against Walsall, we did not score a set-piece goal from 6 preseason games. And by the way, the penalty miss against Lazio was poor. You can't go down the middle along the floor. This is starting to become a problem. Archer's was brilliantly saved, but we've got a problem in this department. We need a reliable penalty taker. But just like the other preseason games, against Lazio and Valencia, we had a lot of routines that fizzled out, that were sloppy, at times nullified before they even started. Corners that were called back because of a foul in the area or offside, or the ball crossed the goal line. It was very uncharacteristically untidy. Now, I don't think Aston Villa was going to pull out the very best set pieces from their catalog in any of these preseason games, so I'm not too fussed about that. In fact, you could argue that we should be very positive about how many goals were scored from open play. In fact, they all were, with the exception of one, and we scored a lot. But in a league where so many games, in fact, 37% of those games are decided by one goal, now is the time when we really have to start buckling down on set-piece delivery. And Austin McPhee, who is well regarded within the club, even though I wondered whether he'd survive the regime change last year, spends so much time on this under the watchful eye of Unai Emery. They've even employed TrackMan, a golfing tool, to help with the speed, the trajectory, the arc of the actual deliveries. In fact, Greg Evans did a really nice piece on this in The Athletic back in June. So now is the time. We need to start to deliver, and I do wonder, are we going to increase our production from dead ball situations in the coming season? I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge our wonderful sponsors, 24/7 Services UK. I've put their phone numbers in the description below because they have offices in Liverpool, Manchester, and Birmingham, but they are so busy right now, which is fantastic. The major project at Wigan Station for Network Rail, smaller projects, first aid training, new product training. And Paul Hansaker and I have been scheming on a fall contest, which could be spectacular, sort of like a makeover. I'll keep you informed about that later. But speaking of contests, congratulations to Mike Collins from Rancho Cucamonga in beautiful California. In fact, this is Mike's version of his own parlor outside. And he followed the socials like I'm encouraging you to keep doing and won Villa's new Home Pro kit, which I've sent off to him. He's also recruiting more members of Villa Nation, including his adorable mother and his best friend growing up. I really love California. I would love it if Aston Villa came and had a preseason there, even though it's a little bit more challenging because that's another 3 hours away from Birmingham in the time zones. Distant Diego. Because we don't get pre-match press conferences during the preseason to the extent that we do in the regular season. Oh, and we're just days away from our first either Thursday or Friday pre-Newcastle, but we don't get fitness updates during the preseason. And so I'm sure you've noticed that Diego Carlos was not involved in either of these two matches. And given what I said last show about the mental side of injury recovery, I really hope that our Brazilian defender is okay and that this is just a minor fitness issue, because I don't think a lot of Villa fans even realize how many clubs wanted this player from Sevilla, including Manchester City and Newcastle, and we got him. And we need him, and we're going to need him. We don't need injuries, and if there's any player that certainly does not need any injury problems from here on in, it's Diego Carlos. Torres tinkering. There's going to be an adjustment period for Pau Torres in the Premier League, and in the Valencia game, it just felt awkward at times because I felt the home side was purposely trying to seal him off, being fully aware of who he was as basically a local rival and a key member of Villarreal, and they really nullified him in that game and put a lot of pressure on, which wasn't really helped out by the fact that he had zero relationship with whoever was playing on the left side from an attacking standpoint. There was very little support at times, and he drifts naturally to that part of the field anyway. And I can't help but think that with Alex Moreno fit and ready and on that side, providing support, being an outlet, he'll have a much better time. But the experiment at Valencia ended after 45 minutes, as it did against Lazio, a game where he was so untested and so comfortable, it was hard to even know if he was effective or not. Another theme between these two games, complete control. With both Lazio and Valencia, you really have to think hard about any time in either game when Villa was seriously under the cosh. At Valencia, there was definitely a change after the first hydration break, about 30 minutes in, and after halftime, there was a concerted effort by the home team to fight and press and push to try to win the ball back. But for the rest of the time, we were in complete control of both games and surrendered very few grade A type chances. And I know there's going to be anxious moments because we're inviting teams to come press us. We want that to happen. And there's something exhilarating about when we escape those and then turn that into attack. And there are other times when we're just delaying with the ball, pinning it, holding it, and killing the clock while in possession, which is just an extension from what was going on at the end of last year. Beleaguered Bailey. We are now at a stage where we can start scrutinizing individual performances a little bit more closely. And if Jaden Philogene-Bidace played himself into the squad during this preseason, there's a case to be made that Leon Bailey might have played himself out of it. And I get that he arrived at camp late because of his Gold Cup commitments with Jamaica, but do you remember a single moment in any of his preseason games where he came close to scoring? And he's here to attack. He does have to help defend. It was very awkward against Valencia when he was on the same side of the field as Pau Torres. And when he was on the right side of the field, he was just neither offering thrust or an opening in attack and not really defending effectively and providing support to the right-sided defensive player either. This is a big moment for Leon Bailey, and I'm still concerned about whether or not he is the goods to handle even bit part work in a long Premier League season that also includes some Europa Conference League games. Archer absent. Another player who could have really benefited from a goal this preseason is Cameron Archer. And I mentioned earlier, the penalty save against Fulham by Bernd Leno was utterly brilliant. What do you do? What do you say? And we should probably be more encouraged by how he drew that penalty in the first place, because that is Cameron Archer. But he's had limited minutes, and even 1 or 2 goals would have given himself some confidence, not to mention his teammates to give him the ball and the coaching staff to have belief in him, because I have this lingering worry about putting all of our scoring eggs in the Ollie Watkins basket. And I would be shocked if we weren't seriously exploring ways of bringing in a bona fide goal poacher. We've certainly had no shortage of links to those kinds of players this summer transfer window. Ollie on target. Despite everything I just said, the only way to describe Ollie Watkins' preseason as a whole would be outstanding, with one blemish, the penalty against Lazio. The goal he scored against the Italians was a scorcher. You really get a good sense of that from behind the net, of how purely and beautifully he struck that after cutting in. And then against Valencia, I call that a snapshot. Not a lot of leg lift, and just whip it so you don't give the goalkeeper a chance to get set. But also, it was the other work that he does in every single game, the back-to-goal work where he keeps his team in possession, winning aerial duels and knockdowns, and then doing the dogged pressing, which he's becoming very efficient at, which is what led to the 1-0 goal at Valencia. Feisty friendlies. We should call them unfriendlies. I was surprised at how testy both of those matches became, but when you're the opponent of Aston Villa and you're not seeing much of the ball and you're not getting a sniff in front of goal, I could see how that momentum might start to boil over a little bit. And then there's a reason why we were the most fouled team in the Premier League last year. I think a lot of it has to do with really intricate coaching detail, but we have a lot of players that are extremely clever in how they position themselves when receiving the ball. Douglas Luiz, John McGinn, Buendia at times, Boubacar Kamara, and now Tielemans. All of them know how to shield the ball at the exact right time, invite an opponent, and then win the free kick. And when that starts to occur over and over, you could feel it start to boil over, and the temperature increased to almost hostility in both games. And you know what? That's good. You want a meaningful, testy game because it's more realistic. That's the whole point of preseason. Try to create realistic circumstances. Musa muted. Did you notice that in both the Lazio and Valencia games that Musa Diaby's greatest attributes were somewhat corralled And that, of course, is his ability to dribble even through traffic and, of course, his explosive speed. And I do wonder, against opponents you're not entirely familiar with, where this feeling out period, whether a player like that is kind of on the periphery, whereas when you get into a wide open track meet like the Brentford game, that's when a guy like Musa does his damage. Diaby was withdrawn at halftime against Lazio and at 64 minutes against Valencia. To be truthful, I didn't even notice him, frankly, in the second half. I was shocked that he went 64 minutes. And you'd think a player like that would have the most amount of joy in the later stages of those games, because the opponents are trying to assert themselves to get back in the contest, and sometimes that means sacrificing players at the back. And the good news here is that despite the fact that he really didn't have any big moments, kind of in either of those games, everybody on the park is aware that he's on the field, and that opens up opportunities for others. You want to double Diaby, you're going to leave somebody else open. If you want to leave him be, he's probably going to skin you. He's a starter at Newcastle, of that there is no question, but I will be curious to see whether he can last the 90 minutes and be impactful in the hopeful event that Villa goes up a goal and Newcastle is pressing. Villa, victorious. 2 games against 2 very different opponents at differing stages of their preseason, with Villa using a vast array of unique combinations and even systems. And against Lazio, it was all about a relentless attack. And 3-0 flattered the Italians. When you think about the missed penalty, Tielemans going crossbar and down. How about the take and turn by Buendia when he dragged it wide with his left foot from close range? You had Coutinho's free kick well saved and Dean just missing heading the rebound in. I mean, it was wave after wave. And then against Valencia, it was more about patience, possession, and then opportunism. Ollie Watkins with a good press and a fantastic finish. And then again, Villa made more changes and got that second goal. Again, really well worked by Phil Coutinho to Emi Buendia. And what can you say? 2 games, 2 wins, 2 totally different ways. I'm sure you know this. I'm sure you've heard the cliches, but winning is as much about the mental side and the confidence side as it is about tactics, formations, systems, and personnel decisions. And we finished that campaign undefeated. A couple of clean sheets. Shame to not get another. Probably a shame to let a couple of leads slip, but we fell behind 2-0 against Brentford and completely reversed that scoreline. The whole thing, and it starts with the manager, looks so much more purposeful than this time last year. And I just can't help but feel we are on this momentum right now as we head into showtime. Up next, it's my preseason prediction show, not just where I think Aston Villa will finish the season, but also how I think they'll line up against Newcastle and some of the more specific statistical milestones that I think the club will have to achieve. I'll talk maybe a little bit about how I think some of the other clubs around us may fare, but can you remember a bigger game to start a season than this one? Both clubs are on a similar trajectory. Big-time owners with big ambitions who have purchased some pretty big players during the summer transfer window colliding on week 1. And it feels like you win that game, poof, it's like hitting a turbo boost button. I cannot wait. Until that show, be well, stay in the sun, stop making fun of my tan, and as always, up the mighty Villa!